This is the final word, story time 192. Jeff Lemon and Adam Collins together again. We're back, baby. The World Cup's over. We're broadly speaking in some form of being home, both of us, and we are ready to resume normal service in one way or another, given that everything has been absolutely freaking bonkers for the last month or so. Breathe in, breathe out. How are you feeling?
Yeah, good. I've been a busy boy for lots of reasons, but not least the fact that I've been taking the chance post-World Cup to play a lot of cricket. I've played 3 games in the last 3 days, so I turned out at Burley Park for the Authors, which is a fixture I played in last year. It's like an all-day fixture that starts at 10:30 in the morning and goes through until quite late, but it was a relatively high-scoring affair, I think. I can't quite remember how it all went. Truth be told, it feels given how much cricket I've been playing. But we did have a win. The actual highlight of that game was on the batting side of things. I had a teammate called Mark Rice Oxley, who, unbeknownst to me, is a colleague of ours at the Guardian. Jeff, he's an editor there on the front of the paper, the important part of the paper. And Mark made 100. He was opening the batting because I was in the car that had 4 people in it, all running late, so there was a rejig of the batting order because we were batting first. Made a century, but he said to me he'd been playing cricket his whole life, and this was his second century. His first one was made 35 years before. So It's just kind of a reminder, I suppose, that if you keep playing for long enough, good things will happen. It's slightly inspirational, actually. It kind of reminds me that there's no way I'm retiring anytime soon. A slightly trickier fixture on the Wednesday where I was playing on an absolute road at a gorgeous private school in Surrey, which some of that might come up a little bit later. And then yesterday I had the great pleasure of captaining the Cricket Riders Club for the first time. I've taken over that team. This year we played against the Lord's Taverners, which was a nice little twist on. Usually we're talking about the Lord's Taverners and the fundraising work we do for them, but David Gower was umpiring, which was pretty cool. And India Newman, who does a lot of the social media work for the Tabs and has worked a lot with us, she hit me for a towering 6 straight back over both my head and David Gower's head over the sight screen. It was the first time she'd ever hit a 6. So that was a nice part of the day. And we did get the job done. We did win the game, but it was a nice, healthy final word contingent playing in that game because, as is always the way with these things, a couple of players dropped out at the last minute. So we had, and that cascaded into election night, Jeff, because of course it has been the general election here on Thursday and the expected landslide, change of government and all the rest of it. So quite a number of the final word flock were out last night watching, and I'm happy to say celebrating the change of government here, and deep into the night. I think a couple of the boys are still out. I don't think they've gone home yet. So that was quite good fun, and on we go. So yeah, despite the fact that there's been no cricket, it's been a fairly hectic few days.
Who knew that at the beautiful private school that it would be symbolic that they'd have an absolute belter where everything's as easy as it could possibly be, as long as you got the bat in hand.
Yeah, well, it did feel that way. It wasn't, put it this way, it wasn't a day to be a finger spinner on a road, on a ground that was absolutely lightning. We did win. We won. It was a really good finish, actually. Not as good as the finish that I'm about to talk about in my answers for story time, but I think we got over the line by about 9 runs with 9 balls to spare in a timed game where we got the final wicket, and all 4 results were on the table with about 3 overs to go. So it was close. But yes, when a couple of those big boys who are going to go off and, I assume, play professional cricket saw me bowling off breaks at them on a flatty, they were very happy to hit through the line, needless to say. So an occupational hazard, you could say, being a finger spinner.
And you're now the Billy Midwinter of the Lord's Taverners. Some weeks you play for them, some weeks you play against them. Australia, England, Australia. Yeah, whatever. Whoever's got a spot in the side.
It's kind of true when you think about it. So I captained the Australian Media 11 a couple of times overseas in Sri Lanka and in New Zealand. So that's tended to be the role I've taken on. So I'm doing the England and the Australian side, depending on where we are in the world. But yeah, nice thing to be able to do. And we'll all be playing with the Taverners. A few final word friends are playing for the Tavs on Sunday. And yes, we'll be playing for them as a final word composite team in Scotland. Later in the year as well. So there's still time if you want to get involved on that Scotland trip in August, if you want to come up and watch or umpire or score or just enjoy the fringe shows that we'll go to by night. I think the tour's from the 18th or 19th of August for about 4 days.
And I've managed to get out of the Caribbean eventually after all the delays and thoughts, especially with people on Grenada who got hit really, really hard by Hurricane Beryl down there. Barbados got lucky in the end. There was some damage, particularly sort of around the coast. It was mostly with boats, with watercraft that were already in the sea, but nothing like what's happened elsewhere. So it's been a grim period with that hurricane smashing its way across.
How long did it take you? I mean, in the end, just fill me in, because I know we weren't able to talk for about 3 days there. You had no Wi-Fi, and we did the weekly show with Cam and Cam Ponsonby and Dan Gallen instead. That went really well, by the way. Thanks for the feedback on the heartfelt conversation with Dan. I think people really took quite a bit out of that and getting a different kind of perspective on what it is to be South African, and Cam always providing great insight. But when we couldn't contact you and we cracked on anyway, you were in a world of pain for a couple of days.
Yeah, it was. I mean, initially the Sunday, some people were able to get out on the Sunday after the final. Most of us had budgeted for the chance of the reserve day, and so if you're down to work on a World Cup final, you've got to travel the 2 days after. So most of that was booked for the Monday, which was when the hurricane came through Sunday night. So everything was cancelled Monday, and most of us were sort of being told we might get out a week later, sort of Saturday or Sunday the following, and then they just managed to clear things up quickly enough that some flights started getting out by Tuesday afternoon, and just by complete chance, basically, I managed to jag a couple of seats opened up on a plane getting out to the US, and I was able to grab one at just the right time. So, in the end, it ended up not being sort of only being a few days rather than a week or so, which, and a lot of people were sort of like, oh yeah, how sad getting stuck in Barbados. It wasn't a happy time to be there. People weren't having a good time. There wasn't the usual vibe of that island, which is pretty kicked back and people enjoying themselves for the most part. There was very little of that with the ocean coming up over the seawalls and drenching the roads down by the shore, and everybody inside and everything shut down. So it was a bit weirdly reminiscent of some of the COVID stuff a couple of years before, and strange to be back in that situation. And still thinking of everybody who's dealing with the aftermath there.
Right, so we're about to crack on with story time 192. By the way, 192, cap number for the Australian men, George Toms. We haven't really done an answer on George Toms before.
No,
he's part of that
come up.
cohort of players that only took the field in one test match. So I hope that someone will give me a little half volley to talk about him at some point, because I'm quite interested in the story of the former Victorian opening bat. Yes, 192. That's my contribution to that. You've got something as well.
I'd obviously say Kumar Sangakkara, Rudy Kurtzen, caught behind off the helmet. Hobart, one of the great chasers, blown. Poor old Rudy, who felt pretty bad about it afterwards. And Sangakkara went on to make another 192 a couple of years later. Consecutive in the history of 192s.
That's right.
So, but we've got other numbers to talk about, and we're going to do so via the medium of Nerd Pledge. Nerd Pledge, the game we play with people on the internet who send us a number. They send us an amount of currency, and it relates to a number, and we have to figure out what it means. But we're cooking the books today. We're doing things a bit differently today because we couldn't help this. Because normally we're talking about something that happened a long time ago, or at least a little while ago. But something happened this week, and you might be able to guess what it was, that in cricketing terms was so momentous that we looked at it and thought, well, if this were 50 years later, we would be going through the scorecard going, what the actual happened here? Like, this is extraordinary, and we'd be super excited about finding it. So we thought, bugger it, let's not wait 50 years. Let's do it here. And let's take a couple of liberties by finding a number that relates to it. We worked our way backwards. Rob Richardson, you are the sacrificial lamb this week, because you sent in a pledge of £5.17, and it wouldn't mean this because you can't see the future. It wouldn't be related to this particular game, but now it is. We've decided that it is. And Rob Richardson, you are the medium for Adam to start and for us to go through this ridiculous story that happened over the last few days. Adam, 5:17, away you go.
Yeah, the Glamorgan and Gloucestershire tie at Cheltenham at the festival that, you're right, we're going to talk about forever. I mean, when Cam and I were doing our little county roundup on Monday, this game barely rated a mention. We reflected on the fact that Marnus Labuschagne had taken a wicket bowling seam up, but it just looked like another game in Division 2 that was a low-scoring affair, which most of them were across days 1 and 2 last weekend. From memory, 3 of the 4 teams that batted first were bowled out for less than 100, and this was the other game where Gloucestershire were all out for 179 in their first innings. Them Gloucestershire being the host at Cheltenham, of course. They play their one festival game there each year, their one first-class game, sometimes two, but one this year. March and Delunga saved their bacon, really. The big veteran journeyman fast bowler who came in at number 10 and made 46 not out. They were at one stage 88 for 8. And Ajit Singh Dale, remember his name for later, he made 32 at number 11. So a big partnership to get them to 179 in context. Timmy Vandergerten, who's the Dutch star, back on the tools there for Glamorgan, took 5 for 59. And Dan Douthwaite took 2 for 23. More on him later as well. Now, Glamorgan don't make the most of the position they're in because they're bowled out for 197 in their first innings, right? So again, it's a lower order save the day job with Mason Crane, 44, top scoring, and final word fave Kieran Carlson, or should I say Glenn Finkel's mate, Kieran Carlson. They played together many years ago, making 37. Maybe not many years ago. He was the overseas at Hampton. Anyway, I had a Hampton Cricket Club cap that I was wearing quite a bit on the show, and then somehow I managed to lose it. I could put on my cricket writer's cap, actually, holding it to camera now. It's one of the nicer baggy caps that I've been involved in designing. Anyway, put that to one side. So 197 all out, Glamorgan. Bo Webster, this is our number, by the way, for Rob Richardson, takes 5 for 17, the big Tasmanian, in 10.1 overs. So he's the best of the bowlers on show. And Big Marchant, who I mentioned before, took 3 for with his Rockets as well. So they take 8 of the 10 wickets between them, the two seamers.
How does Bo qualify? Because he wouldn't get in. He hasn't played an Australian game yet.
Must have a passport. I just assume he's got a British passport. He'll get in as a
that's what I was thinking. I mean, I don't know the detail of it, but unless he's played Australia A stuff, but that doesn't qualify.
I think it might actually. I've got a feeling Aussie A stuff gets you. Yeah, he has. He's played Australia A white ball stuff. Either way, I would. It's more likely than not that he's here as a passport player, so he won't be eligible in that weird category where you can play, but you can't qualify for England unless you're doing your 240 days a year thing that Dan Worrell's doing at the moment. So the first 2 innings of the match are completed in 105.5 overs, barely into day 2, remembering their 96 over days here. The main concern was that it was going to ruin the festival. This will be over inside 2 days, and it's a big deal. It's a centerpiece of the Cheltenham Festival. I went out there last year to play a game in theory for the Tabs, and it got rained out. And it's such a gorgeous spot to be playing cricket in the first place. And, to think that it was a pitch that reportedly was designed to give a bit more to the bowlers because they're mindful that on out grounds often it can be just runs after runs because they're smaller grounds and they tend to be quite flat. But this was giving plenty to the seamers. But instead of ruining the festival in 2 days, it goes on to become one of the wildest games of first-class cricket ever played. Only a week after, Louis Kimber played one of the wildest innings in first-class history. That's the framework here. Gloucestershire, in their second innings, go to work. In 116 overs, they go at 5.25 runs an over. Cameron Bancroft, 184. Miles Hammond, 121 from just 110. James Bracey, 204 not out from 231 deliveries. And they get to 610 for 5 declared. Talk about a contrast in fortunes from the day before.
Extraordinary. Absolutely
bonkers. And this is like barely a session into day 3.
Right.
This game is galloping along. 20 wickets to get going. And then
Bo,
followed by...
Don't forget Bo bashing them at the end.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, everyone's having their way here. It's absolute carnage. Dan Douthwaite mentioned I played a game on a road the other day. Dan Douthwaite is the alumni of the Reed School, and I was being told by their cricket master that he used to just pongo balls out of the ground for fun with Phil Salt. They played in the same school teams and all the rest of it.
I love the contrast on this scorecard as well, where you got the Bancroft massive 100, Bracey double, the Hammond fast 100, and then Charlesworth golden duck. Graham Van Buren, duck off 4 balls. Oliver Price, 8 off 22. And then Bo Webster at the end, 65 not from 68. So it's boom bust territory. There is nothing in between.
And Dan Douthwaite, who I mentioned before, he took 1 for 91 from 11 overs. He cops the worst of the Webster onslaught towards the end. Dan Douthwaite, who Daniel and I are always duty bound to say was the what do we call it? When we were working in the pandemic, Dan and I were given the brief of commentating a video game for the Cricketer website. It was called the was it the Quarantine Cup or something like that? And Dan Douthwaite won. He was player of the final for Glamorgan when Glamorgan won the trophy. But we were weirdly, in the commentary, we were weirdly emotional at the end. I don't know. There was no cricket to call. We're like, Glamorgan have, they've done it. They've finally won another trophy. We were all we were way too invested in this. So,
does it count?
Anyway.
Does it go to their tally? You know how there's always the disputes on the wiki pages about whether this actually counts as a championship or not?
Yeah, the Quarantine Cup, I'm counting it, that's for sure. Mm-hmm. So back to the game in question. Glamorgan is set 593 in 152 overs. So a required rate of 3.9, if you squint at it kind of thing. Mm. And this is a lot of the commentary post-fact. It's like, well, we've just seen them make 600 plus. We'll have a dart at this. There was some grumbles
very
online.
Ben Duckett energy, though. Like, the more they make, the more we can chase.
Exactly. There was some grumbles online saying, they'd left them not enough time. They should have, gave them 180 overs and set them 400 or whatever it was. But, and then Glamorgan get off to a flyer in their chase. They're 222 for 3 by stumps on day 3.
Yeah.
Marnus is 67 and Slam and Sam Northeast is 47. But it still leaves 371 to get on the final day. 371 on the final day. Now, at this point, I want to just note that Nick Friend has written a tremendous piece about this game on the Cricketer website that was published about 2 hours ago. Good timing in terms of me prepping this answer as well. And he goes into some depth about what was going on around the club that day. Bristol, the club that where Gloucestershire are based in Bristol, were hosting the England-New Zealand women's game on the same day as day 4. So, it's been a tough year for Gloucestershire. No one would dispute how difficult it is. Their financial returns, they moved their chairman on. Will Brown has moved on as chief executive, and I think there was a lot of goodwill towards Will Brown and what he was trying to do with that club. I have a lot of respect for him. But, they've got an interim CEO right now. The club's in a bit of strife, right?
Yeah, but got the same that dead shit, whatever his name is, sniffing around trying to use them for a
Aaron Banks, who's I don't know whether Aaron Banks. I suppose he probably had quite a good night last night, but the exit polls had Reform winning 13 seats, ended up with 4, so probably not enough to launch an insurgency and take over the Conservative Party. Although you'd never rule it out with those freaks.
No, but weirdly, a lot more airtime given to that than like the Greens winning 4 seats, or
it's a fair point.
Pro-Gaza Independents winning 4 seats, or any
that's a good point. The Greens winning 4 seats. You're right. I think that there'll be more coverage of Reform, probably because there's a greater chance of just look at the graph of the number of votes they received proportionately across the country. I think they ended up with 17% of the national vote. So yes, they're light on for seats, but they have received a far bigger number of votes. They're the third biggest party for votes across the country, I think I'm right in saying. So that'll prompt the coverage that they'll inevitably get over the next few years. And whether they try and do something with the Tories, I don't know. It'll be an absolute bloodbath either way, and I look forward to watching it very closely. They go from the pair of them. This is Marnus and Northeast. They take it from 156 to 309 when Marnus is out relatively early on the final day for 119. But then there's like partnership after partnership with Sam Northeast. These aren't huge runs, but it just gives Northeast the ballast. So Chris Cook makes 14. Douthwaite makes 39. Timmy Van der Gerten makes 31. They get it down to 140 runs needed in the final session with 4 wickets in hand. Enter Mason Crane with Northeast with the score 509 for 7. Just to recap, 86 needed in 22 overs is where we are roughly at this stage, roughly. Then Northeast goes for 187 after 407 minutes in the middle. He's caught behind by Bracey. If you're wondering, he's up to 902 runs this year at 69. Northeast keeps on keeping on.
But 550 of them are in 2 hits.
Yeah, he's got 300, 3 big hundreds, and then it's been barren.
Well, he got the 3. What was he?
335.
335 plus
335 at Lords plus the 187. And I think there's a 200 in there as well.
Yeah.
Other than that, so Northeast deals in match winning performances, or indeed match tying, as is proved to be. 49 to go.
Match not losing performance.
Match not losing. 49 to go, 2 wickets in hand. Andy Gorvin comes in and he ends up getting bowled by Big Marchant Dalunga, who for a brief moment in time was one of the fastest bowlers in the world in the early days of the IPL.
Yep.
561 for 9 becomes the score at this point. 32 to go. Last wicket, 8 overs. Then Mason Crane's still there. And he plays, and I talked about Mason Crane on the weekly show And I've talked about him quite a bit on commentary recently. I think he's going to have an England career again. He's bowling superbly. Some of those compilations of the way he's been able to mix up his varieties and how far he spins his leg break. He's not an old bowler, and he's averaging 43 with the bat this year. So, a leg spinner who can bat, that's often something that's attractive. It's certainly the argument we've been making for Matt Critchley. Anyway, he's played one test all those years ago, which was a bit of an awful thing to do to him in 2018 at Sydney to play him in those circumstances, but has been around the England squad a little bit. So he's got that experience, and he plays the game perfectly with Jamie McElroy, who's the number 11. Milks a strike, in-out stuff, all the rest of it. Gets it down to 2 runs needed. It's the final over, and he's on strike. And the over is being bowled by the man who I referred to earlier in our conversation. It is Ajit Singh Dale, right? And it's a good over. It takes until the 5th ball before he can break the shackles and get a single. He gives the strike away.
Yeah, well, he has to at that point. It's tricky, this. And I imagine if he's looking back at it, he'd go, I should have taken one early and trusted the 11 to get one off a few balls or whatever it was. But I can totally understand why he didn't want to. You take one and then the other guy gets bowled and you're going, well, I should have just backed myself to find 2. And he's trying to find 2.
Of course, yeah.
You watch that last over and it's like a nice length, basically back of a length, a round off stump, and he just can't quite find it. He's sort of fiddling the ball and he keeps finding the fielder here, finding him there. Okay, only one there. Let's not take the one. Let's not take the one. He's backing himself to eventually find a gap. He's got 6 opportunities to do it. And it's by the 5th ball, he's like, okay, fuck it, we have to take the one now and just hope for the best.
Yeah, so he takes that a deep backward square from the penultimate ball, right? So that leaves McElroy to face. Now, Ajit Singh Dale charges in, and this is where I bring James Bracey back in. James Bracey, who was involved in a blast game a couple of months ago, where he didn't take the glove off when the scores were level, final ball, and it prohibited him from throwing the stumps down. So he had the presence of mind to take off his right mitt and stick it down his trousers, down the back of his trousers. And he took about 3 steps up, closer to the stumps, for the obvious reason that if they took a bye, he'd be ready to try and ping the stumps down. And they had a field arrangement where the man at gully came to within 5 metres of the stump, so he could conceivably charge up and take the bails if they did come through, if it did get to Bracey. And gosh, how it got to Bracey,
which I'm surprised more teams don't do. You don't see that with one to win, with a ball or 2 to go. Like having, you need a short leg basically, or actually really probably someone behind square. You need like a short, like a sort of silly point or someone to a couple of paces behind square, so they're ready to. They can see both batters running and they can come in. They can take a throw from the keeper or from anybody else.
Yeah. So this in the end, I don't require it because Ajit Singh Dale bowls an absolute beauty, angling in, somehow finding some lateral movement away at pace, hits high on the edge and flies to Bracey, who has to change direction and dive to his right and pluck it out of the air. It's a stunning catch. He goes on to say it's the best catch of his career, and it surely is. So much scrutiny on Bracey's keeping in those 2 test matches that he played for England back in 2021. Well, he's made that double 100, an unbeaten double 100 to give them a chance. And then he takes this absolute screamer to tie the match from the last ball of the game. I mean, I love the fact that, the tied test in 1960 and the tied test in 1986 that both came down to the penultimate delivery of those 2 test matches. This was the last ball of the match. Because, of course, you can tie a match on the 3rd day. You don't need to get to – it's just that there's something about tied matches going all the way to the bitter, bitter end.
All 4 results.
And so it did here. I mean, all 4 results, you would say that at T, right, with 4 wickets needed 140 runs to get. That's the perfect all 4 results type scenario. But to actually still be there right at the very end to the final ball, having all 4 results on the table. And yeah, poor old McElroy. I guess it's the 2nd time in a couple of weeks that a McElroy's come close to doing something special and missing out after what happened to Rory, choking. I don't like that term, but missing out in a major. But yeah, Bracey goes on to be, because of it, 10th dismissal and a double 100, the first keeper to ever achieve that double.
Wow.
His batting average this year is 64, so that's a great story of itself. James Bracey, I'm so happy to hear the interview he did with Will McPherson a couple of months ago on the Telegraph, and the trauma and the mental health challenges that he's experienced after that brief time in the England team. It's really cool that he's like getting his proper go now and making it work for Gloss after a couple of lean years. There have been, till Nick wrote his article today, 4 million views of Bracey's catch on socials, which, it takes a fair bit for a county clip to go viral like that, and so it did. They interrupted the BBC live tennis coverage from Wimbledon on 5 Live to cut to Graham Van Buren to put an interview on, which, these things don't happen
Graham,
with county cricket.
You made 0 from 4 deliveries. How did you feel about your performance?
Yeah, well, he was the captain, right? And it goes down as the 4th highest innings score. Sorry, my apologies. The highest 4th innings score in UK history. The highest 4th innings first class score anywhere since the coronation of Elizabeth II. And it was 1 run away from annihilating the highest first class chase ever, which is 536 from about 20 years ago. So for all of that labour, for all of that work across the last 2.5 days, both teams only end up with 11 points because they get 8 for the draw, but you don't get batting points in the second innings of the championship. You only get batting points for the first innings.
So they got bowling points for the first.
Because they both fucked their first innings up. They both get their bowling points, 3 apiece, but they don't get the 5 available batting points. So they walk away with I would call it a modest draw with 11 points. And it goes on to be, the first tie in 6 seasons in the championship. The previous one, I think, was when Dom Bess lost his head late against Lancashire. It's the 69th tie, in the history of first-class cricket. And remember, they count records going all the way back to the Battle of Waterloo. So it's a massive sample size. Only 69 times they've had the teams tied at the end. And, you zoom out a little bit here. This is 5th versus 6th in Division 2.
Yep.
Neither of them are going up. In Gloucestershire's case, let's not overplay this, but they're on the edge here at the moment.
Yep.
It's a sad story. We all want it to get better there financially. But it's a reminder, too, that the 18-team competition, the vagaries of county cricket, the magic of county cricket, indeed festival cricket, can throw up results like this because there are so many more games and thus so many more opportunities to see something wild. And we've seen 2 extraordinary things in 2 weeks. We will never forget either of them. The tie after what happened with Louis Kimber and his once-in-a-century Ted Allotson redux, if you like.
Yep.
And that'll be, for us at least, Rob Richardson's 517 as well.
And a twinning of, Mason Crane with his brief England career that buggered him up for a while, and James Bracey with his, and the 2 of them on opposite ends of the thing. And the fact that both of those sides will be looking at that saying, well, fuck, we should have won that. The chasing side will say, we had it in hand, even at 9 down. And the defending side saying, well, we put up 600 on them, should never have got that close. But, if it hadn't, like if they'd bowled them out for 320 or something, then it would have been a very unmemorable thing. Whereas this, if you can have the consolation, you might have it a little bit later in your career that you were part of something completely memorable. It would have been the highest run chase ever, and instead it ends up as that absolutely bizarre, bonkers result, the one-handed catch with the glove off as well, to a ball that was travelling, and poor old McElroy, well, he'll make some money out of it on the after dinner circuit, hopefully.
On the speaking circuit,
in years to come. Brilliant stuff. Thank you for looking all of that up, and thanks to Rob Rich for not knowing that he was going to let us tell that story, but he did.
A pleasure to do it, Jeff. Before we go to the break, a quick word for the Lord's Tavs. We haven't noted them on the way through for a couple of weeks, and we should, because they continue to do wonderful things. It's their 75th anniversary next year, and we've got big things planned. You know what? Fuck it. I'm just going to say it. 75 years, 75 runners.
Okay.
You feel me?
Yeah.
You hear me?
Yeah. Synergy.
So just think about it. I've already had a couple of people tell me.
Yeah.
One person in particular, just going to throw her under the bus. Hayley Fuller is considering doing the Haggis next year. The Haggis at the Edinburgh Marathon is the 5K and the 10K back-to-back on the Saturday.
Yeah.
Then the half marathon and the full marathon back-to-back on the Sunday.
No.
About 1 or 2 people do it a year.
No.
Very few women have done it. And Hayley, after a couple of beers last night, or a couple of glasses of rosé last night when we were watching the election, she's like, I don't know, I could go one way or the other next year. I could, because she's run lots of marathons. She's like, I might do nothing or I might do everything. And I think
is that our fault? Because I said this on the show a few weeks ago where I said, does anybody do this?
Yeah.
And she may have heard it. I can't help but feel like I've inadvertently said something terrible in train.
Well, it'll all be there for the Tabs and the great work they're doing. You know, you get, every time we do events with them, like yesterday's game's another great example of, it just reinforces why we're doing the right thing and how grateful they are. They spoke to us at length yesterday, to the people who were there, who, you know, Ollie was there with me as well, Ollie Bellwood, who played for us, and and did the half marathon with me, and just kind of saying that what we're doing on that side of the ball is making a big difference for them. So we're very proud of the money we've raised so far. We'll be back on that bike or back on the running track, I suppose, later in the year. And yeah, it'll be a lot more to tell you about the Lord's Taverners through the course of 2024.
How old's David Gower? He must be, is he close to 75?
Gower made his test debut in 78, so work backwards from there. I think he was 1958. What's that make him? He'll be 70 in 8 years. Say 66. Sounds about right.
All right. So 10 years shy. We need to find a 75-year-old to do the 75th anniversary marathon.
No, he's not that old. He's not that old. I did enjoy bowling from his end yesterday. Yeah. I mean, it's one of the joys of playing tabs games that Gadding and Gower umpire them. So it's a nice thing giving your cap over to. And I went through the gate of Toby Tarrant. And missed his leg stump by millimeters. Mate of the show, we've done a lot of work with Tobes, and that would have been a nice way to cap the day. Having Gower part of it, and David as well was, he sent a lovely video to us before we did our run, and he's obviously been on the show and a big supporter of what we're doing. So more power to the Tabs, and more about them soon.
All right, quick break, and then we're on. It's a final word. Story time 192. First cab off the rank for me this week, whatever it is. It's Pat Rogers. Pat Rogers, who does a lot of historical work on cricket on his own and also helping us out on the show here. So when a number comes in from Pat, there's a certain degree of intimidation that I've got to be able to get this right. And I also can't ask Pat to help me figure out what it is. It's $2.46.
His clue is, I was indirectly caught up in the big dispute before an unusually triangulated tour on which I travelled only to meet my maker on the date of the pledge. Not a test cricketer, but a first-class one. Okay.
Yes.
So some bits there to pull from, right? When's the triangulated?
Yep.
That makes me think 1912. I don't know. We'll see. You'll tell me. Date of pledge. Well, you'll be able to work that out pretty easily. First class one, not a test one. 1912 tour game in that very wet triangular series. Just, I don't know. Do any of these things marry up with the answer you're going to give? We'll find out, I guess.
We will. And yes, initially I also obviously thought the triangular test series of 1912 between Australia, South Africa and England, and it felt like it was in our areas. It's sort of in Pat Rogers' areas as well. 24-6, the big dispute. The main issue I had here is that the pledge actually came in on the 21st of May, and so after looking through a lot of Wisdom obituaries and not finding anything, I eventually managed to elicit from Pat that there needed to be a slight correction to that, because it was about a month later, so 22nd of June. Was actually the date that I was looking for. But that led me, Adam, to a gentleman who I didn't know anything about before this, and I don't know if you did either, called Andrew Ernest Hume. Not the highway guy, but a different guy, who was born in Redfern in 1869 and died in London during the Triangular Test Series of 1912. He was not there as a player, but he was there with the Australian touring party, even though he wasn't entirely there as an administrator either. It takes quite a bit to sort of figure out what was going on with the Ernest Hume story. So he's always known as Ernest, even though his original given name is Andrew. So Ernest Hume is, in the newspaper reports, he's 44 years old, but I managed to track down his listing in the British Births, Deaths and Marriages Register, because even though he's Australian, he didn't die in Australia, so his death isn't registered there. He was, according to the BDR register, he was 43, not 44. He caught double pneumonia. He died in central London, one of a number of Humes to die in England in 1912, according to the register. Anne and Joseph Hume died in their 70s. John W.D., WD-40, they might have called him, made it 60 years old. There was another John, a James and a Florence in their 50s. Halliburton Hume died at 4 years old. And up in Auckland, Durham, little Gladys M. Hume at less than a year. There are always these sad little notes in there as you read through the deaths registries, and you just get a line. You get one line and there's nothing else attached to it, and you've got no idea what the story is, but there's a story there and a whole lot of human grief attached to most of these losses. So there's very little info about Ernest Hume. Either there's just the entry with his name, his adopted second name, that is, his age, and the location is given as Strand, which must mean central London, the street that runs alongside the Thames, along the bank of the Thames from Trafalgar Square, up past the Lyceum, past the Savoy Hotel, the Waterloo Bridge, until it sort of becomes Fleet Street, really, sort of bleeds into Fleet Street there. Top real estate, good monopoly areas, but probably not so good for Ernest Hume. I don't know what establishment he was in. Was he in a hotel? Was it an overnight thing? Was he at a hospital? I'm not sure. But
could have been in the Australian High Commission, which is up by the Strand, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. I suppose it could be. Yeah. The story, in part, as per the Sydney Morning Herald at the time, reads, "Death of Mr. Ernest Hume, a prominent cricketer. Australian cricketers will regret to learn of the death in England of Mr. Ernest Hume. The news came yesterday to Sydney by means of a cable, which Mr. Smith, Secretary of the Board of Control, received from Mr. Rupert Minnis, who was accompanying the Australian team in their tour throughout England. Mr. Hume, who was connected with the Public Works Department at Sydney, was, after 20 years' service, allowed 6 months' leave of absence, and was therefore on a holiday tour. He leaves an aged father and mother, 3 sisters and 2 brothers. His remains will be buried in London." So it's quite sad, really. He's got time off work. He's gone on this trip because he just thinks it'll be a cool thing to do, and he's ended up getting sick and dying a long way from home in London, and catching pneumonia in an English summer, which is a pretty rough way to go as well. But he wasn't just a random tourist wearing a sort of pineapple logo shirt or something. Going to the cricket
you're not wearing a Bintan singlet,
a replica baggy green and a Bintan
replica baggy green, and keeping a list of how many beers he's drunk on one card and how many bongs he's smoked on the other.
He may have done. I don't know what Ernie was up to, but it could have been that. But he was the Redfern Cricket Club's main representative at the State Association for years. And in 1912, there is an election. I don't know if this is the only time this happens, but the Board of Control run an election to see who will be the team manager. And it's a weird period of time. So the players aren't voting in this election. So 1906, the players get the board to agree that they can choose their own manager for all future tours. And then in 1910, the board rescinds this and say, no, we'll pick the manager. And so the big 6, and this is the big dispute, as Pat's mentioned, the big 6 pull out. That's Warwick Armstrong, Trumper, Tibby Cotter, Clem Hill, Vernon Ransford, and Sammy Carter all say, well, bugger you, then we're not going to England. Get somebody else. Ranji Horden, who may or may not be of the Pavilion, has already said he wasn't available. So 7 of the best players in Australia are not going on this touring party. And Clem Hill is supposed to be a selector, but then he walks out as a selector. Ernie Main, who we've talked about a lot on the show, takes that job and then gets a spot in the touring party. Didn't quite pick up on this during the Ernie Main story. Was he a scab? Was he just breaking picket lines? Do we actually hate Ernie Main? I'm not sure. Anyway.
I remember we did this. We did this on the
we were talking about
live
the US
show.
tour. Oh yeah.
No, we did this in our live show in Manchester in 2019, the one we did at Athers Club. We talked about how there was the withdrawal of players, and I can't quite remember who becomes the manager in the end, but I feel like it has something to do with Frank Laver. I don't quite know why. I just got in the back of my mind.
The players want Frank Laver.
The players want Frank Laver.
The players agitate for Frank Laver, and the board says, no, we will pick
because this is basically the end of a lot of their careers, right?
Yeah.
Because what happens is they don't go to 1912 in the triangular, and then World War I breaks out. So I think I'm right in saying, I might be wrong, I don't think Trumper plays Test cricket again. I think his last Test match precedes this 1912 tour. Quite possibly Clem Hill as well. I don't think Clem Hill plays a Test match after this either. So it inadvertently becomes the end of 2 great careers. I mean, of course, Warwick Armstrong does. He has more of a career after the war.
He's relatively young at that point.
Yeah, that's right. We've spoken before about how nimble he was as a younger player, and the Test fifer he took early in his career. But for the majority of the players here, by taking a stand there, not that they would know, but the big 6, I suppose 5 of the 6 of them potentially, saw them out of an international career thereafter because the war intervened.
Yeah, and I know Sammy Carter keeps playing cricket into the 20s, but I don't think he plays for Australia again.
And of course, Tibby Cotter's in that 6, isn't he?
Yeah.
Tragically. Yeah. Tibby Cotter doesn't see the end of the war, dying in 1917, which we've spoken about recently.
So the board has a process to pick a manager, which is an election. I don't know who's voting, but the final 2 on the ballot are a guy called George Crouch, who's from Queensland, and Ernest Hume, who's the New South Wales rep. So Ernest doesn't get the gig, but decides that he'll go anyway. So presumably he's friendly enough with George Crouch that he's able to just pal along on his holiday tour. And it's a mission to get there. The Queensland players all have to travel to Sydney first, where they get on a ship called the Otway with the New South Wales players. They then sail to Melbourne to pick some people up. Adelaide, pick some more up. Perth, pick some more up. They play a game in Perth while they've got 10 hours in Fremantle. They get off and play a match.
This is so interesting that how history repeats, right? I was having a conversation today in relation to what happened in 2020 when Australia had to go to England in 2020, right? Remember they played that white ball series?
Oh,
they chartered a plane, but it wasn't straightforward. So what they did was the plane started on the eastern seaboard and it was like a bus stop. They left at Essendon Airport.
Yeah.
They flew over to Adelaide. They picked up some players from South Australia. Then they flew to Perth, picked up some more. So it's like going around on the bus of a morning before they then flew directly from Perth to London. So a version of this, albeit on the ship, going back 108 years before the pandemic series in England.
Well, not quite as direct on the ship because they stop off in Colombo, play a game there. They stop off in Port Said in Egypt. They stop in Napoli, pre-Maradona. They stop in Toulon in France, Gibraltar, Plymouth, and then eventually land up at Tilbury Docks on the Thames however many weeks or months later. And I guess it doesn't start like the 2020 tour, but maybe it ends like it. So they start well. They win and draw a bunch of their first, I think it's 7 of their first 14 games. I think they win 7. And that feels about right. And they win 7 and they draw 4 is what happens out of the first 14, including winning the first test against South Africa, and one of the university sides and a bunch of the county sides. And then June, which I had it listed as June 22. Pat presumably has it as June 24 because the number is 246, which would be the 24th of the 6th, 24th of June. Either way. Around that time, Ernest Hume dies in London, and from that point, the tour goes completely off the rails. They win 2, I think, out of their next 24 games across the tour. Those wins are the other South Africa test, and they win 1 game against Scotland. And basically there's a lot of draws because it rains a lot, but they're playing on wet pitches. The sort of Wisden report says the players aren't suited to playing on wet wickets, so they lose a bunch of games there. The tour party gets really loose. 3 players get formally reprimanded for their behaviour, including William Carkeek, who Gideon Haigh just released a book about. The Wisden report says that the quote is, "On getting back to Australia, the manager lodged a scathing complaint with the Board of Control stating that some of the players had conducted themselves so badly as to lead to the team being socially ostracised. He urged that in the selection of future teams, something more than the ability to play cricket should be taken into consideration."
That's like that, when you wake up and you've had you might have had a big night and you can't quite piece together every bit of the conversation you might have had with some people. You have that fear. Like, oh God, what the fuck have I said? They've had that big time. So much so that they've that's a real whack around the chops, isn't it? The language being used there.
That says something. I should add that the quote goes on to say, "It may be added here that some of the players were not at all satisfied with Mr. Crouch as manager." So basically, the players and the manager end up hating each other. The guy who could have been manager instead has died on the tour. And I'm not saying that his death is the reason that it goes off the rails, but it does line up nicely in terms of time. And it must have knocked them around a bit to have someone who was a long-term known administrator in New South Wales cricket dying in the middle of the trip. Ernest Hume didn't have much of a career first-class-wise for New South Wales. He went on a tour to New Zealand in 1895 and January 1896 and played 5 games for New South Wales against some New Zealand sides. And did all right, took 17 wickets at 22, made a few runs at 12. He was notionally an all-rounder. I couldn't figure out what he actually... I think he bowled quick and probably opened up, I realise now, because he's bowling to Trumper in the famous... Trumper makes 355 in a first grade game in Sydney, and one of the bowlers who gets absolutely savaged is Ernest Hume in that game, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, that's just something that just came to me just now, so I'm not 100% on the details there. Anyway, but he's very into the administrative side of things. He's a selector for New South Wales often. I found some newspaper records of him being a selector between 1905 and 1911 at different times. I'm not sure if he was before that. And his work at Redfern was really the thing that was his life's work, I suppose. There's a tribute in the paper when he dies from the New South Wales Premier. The quote is, "Mr. McGowan, who is patron of the Redfern Club, last evening said, Ernie Hume was a splendid type of citizen, a manly fellow, and one of our representative cricketers. I knew him intimately since his childhood, and I always held him in high esteem. For many years he and I represented Redfern Club in the association, and it did not matter whether it was on or off the field. Ernie Hume was always the same genial, good-hearted, manly fellow. He was one who had the respect of all his clubmates and the esteem of the cricket world in general." So in October that year, the Premier unveils a tablet, a memorial tablet at Redfern Oval, at which time he says they had to do it to honour one of the best of their comrades, is his line. So I wonder if it's still there, if anyone can wander past Redfern Oval and see if the Ernest Hume plaque is still there, and the premium put upon his manliness by the Premier at the time, Mr. McGowan. It was an important attribute at the time, presumably because it comes up twice in the same sentence. But
I did note that what's he really trying to sell? What's he really trying to tell us there?
I don't know.
Very manly.
I knew him intimately, and he was very manly.
He's very manly, very gentle, very kind.
So if anyone wants to write some slash fiction about Premier McGowan and Ernest Hume, have at it. But yes, he's part of the big dispute with the Big Six because he didn't mean to get embroiled in that, I suppose. And he meets his end in a sad way on his Contiki tour across England. There may be more to find. I'm sure Pat Rogers knows more, but there you go, Pat. That's what I could dig up on a first pass through the story of Ernest Hume.
I think Redfern Ovals, they do a bit of rugby league there, don't they? Isn't that where Souths play? Or at least they train there, or they play a couple of games there or something?
I think they have a ground there, but the Ovals are more an Aussie rules ground now, I think.
Okay.
At Redfern. There is a rugby league ground in the area. What? Someone will be able to remember what the Redfern.
Someone who's not you and me. Someone who's about rugby league.
Someone will know. Just up the road from where the Newtown Jets were going around, there was the Redfern something else team that was quite a thing for a time in the 50s and 60s and so on. Rugby league history, not our strong point.
Yes, I'll take your word for it. Beauty. Okay, thanks, Pat. Great to have his number on the show. I can't tell you how important Pat is to helping build some of the answers that we give. He's got an extraordinary mind and has done some brilliant work. Jacob Norton's next for me, 574NZD. He's been with us before. He's got a clue to go with this.
Jacob says, I've upped my nerd pledge a little, but with a change of currency to get the numbers right. The new number is 574 and has the following clues: a BBC commentator and a type of match that is becoming less frequent. Thanks for all the great listening. Jacob, thank you for the number. What do you got?
Okay, so yeah, there's a bit here, right? We know that. If we're limiting it to BBC commentators,
It's got to be after 1930, basically.
Right. Or indeed, if you want to be more specific, who are considered to be BBC commentators, probably we're looking at a more modern player. The type of match that is becoming less frequent suggests something more regular than, well, more recent than not as well. Anyway, so let's go through this. Tour games, that was my instinct anyway. Tour games. There are other things that aren't happening now as much as they used to, but
one-day cricket or whatever.
But it's hard though. You go through and all of the BBC commentators, broadly speaking, who have been professionals, it's hard to spot any 5 for 74s, be that Aggers or Dagnall or Vic Marks or Graham Swan or Simon Hughes or Gus Fraser. Like there are a lot of 5 for 74s, but. And there is a Mike Selvey 574 who, of course, commentated the Test Match Special from 1984 through until I think 2009 was when he finished up, and a great summariser at that Selv. But that was in a county game, and Tuffer's got one too, but it was also in a county game, not a tour game, so it doesn't quite line up there. So we broadened that a little bit. Could it? Could be West Indies A making 574 against England in the 2009 tour of England. There are a number of like TMS or TMS adjacent commentators there, including Alistair Cook, Graham Swan and James Anderson. They all played in that tour game, but none of them to particularly good effect. Anderson and Swan especially copped a beating before Cook made a first ball duck, so I don't see that being it either. That was the game where Lendl Simmons made a gigantic 282 and everyone thought he was going to be the next big thing, and I suppose he did enjoy his success with the white ball, not quite so much with the red.
Yeah.
And Bharat's mate, Adrian Barrett, who was it's not Adrian Barrett, it's Adrian
Barrett. Yeah,
is it Adrian Barrett?
yeah.
Sorry, right.
That's how they became friends, because they have the same name initially.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. He's seen him recently, hasn't he?
Yeah,
He was,
caught up with him in Trinidad, and was taken to Adrian Barrett's juice shop, I believe it was. So
one of the handful of
yeah,
that's right. Yeah, I did see the photos of that. One of that.
Also, Adrian Barrett's wife has a hair salon, and she did Barrett's hair.
It looks good. I saw the pictures. It was done. It looks very because Barrett pays a lot of attention to his hair. He wears it in a what's the word for it? He wears it in a bag at night. I think there's a word for the bag in question that he places it in. A cap. But it's it's more than a cap. It's
Ma in her kerchief and I in my cap. It just settled our brains for a long winter's nap. He also, when you see him wearing a hat, here's a little behind the scenes. Sometimes on video he's wearing a hat. He does that when he's having a bad hair day, when he hasn't had time to wash and condition, which he likes to do every couple of days. And if he hasn't done that, he will not agree to have his hair filmed.
Yeah, I get it. I understand it. If you've got a good head of hair, you got to make sure it's presented well. And Adrian Barrett was a century on debut type as well. There haven't been many of them for the West Indies. The Gabba in 2009, which is the year we're referring to here. What about? What about this? Again, it's a bit. I don't know. I don't think this will be it, but let's talk about it anyway. There was a tour when Australia visited South Africa in early 2002. We spoke about a tour a couple of weeks ago in Storytime where around this time of year, New Zealand were in Pakistan. Well, at the same time, roughly, it's quite a bit going on in the cricketing world. This was the same time that very sadly Ben Holyoake passed away, having been involved in a car accident in Australia. The Aussies were in South Africa. There was the tragedy in Karachi with the bombing there, which meant that the New Zealand team had to go home. But the Australians played some very competitive Test cricket against South Africa over there. Back when they were it's hardly a bold call to say they were the best two teams in the world. Australia in that Steve Waugh era were going wonderfully, and winning in South Africa was a big deal. Yeah. They'd done it before, but it was a big deal, and they.
And it's a whitewash, right? Because they effectively becomes the sixth Test series. They play the three in Australia, and they end up they're 6-0 at the end of it, aren't they? That Australian.
Yeah. One of the few times they've done. Oh no, they lost a Test in South Africa. Did they? Did they drop one? I feel like they dropped one in 2000. And no, they didn't. That was in 2009. Sorry.
Yeah, I think that's
2009. They dropped one. Yeah. So they do very well in the series writ large. But they play a tour game there at Port Elizabeth, and when they bat, the one time they bat, they make 574 for 9 declared. And in that team was a young Shane Watson. This was a weird summer for Watto. Yeah. Because this is just before he gets picked for the one-day international team. And the working assumption is that he's going to be the number one all-rounder for Australia at the 2003 World Cup. This predates that. I didn't realise that he was actually on this trip to South Africa as the all-rounder as well. Well, the spare all-rounder. He wasn't required to play in the Test matches. He had to wait until 2005 to actually make his Test debut, but 3 years before that,
playing one at that time. I'm trying to remember on that tour. They're still batting Gilchrist at 7, and they've just got the 4 bowlers, right? So they don't actually have the all rounder spot.
Well, they've got Lehmann batting 6. That was the twist. So Lehmann batted 6 through this period of time, and then in 2002, 2003. When I think there's a squeeze before the first Test, then Mark Waugh retires and they get... How do they do that again? Because Mark Waugh retires when he's dropped, right? And Lehmann moves up to 4.
Up to 4 or 5. And Martin's gone up to 4 by that point.
So that's it. That's 5. It. Martin goes to 4, Lehmann goes to 6, and eventually Lehmann goes to 4 when Steve Waugh leaves the team. When they go to Sri Lanka, isn't it? That Lehmann's batting 4, right. Maybe. Oh, yeah, that's it. That's right. And 5, maybe. And Martin Love plays in that summer as well in 02, 03. I should remember this. I did go to every single day of these Test matches. Anyway, but yeah, Shane Watson makes a very brisk first-class 100 not out from 97 balls, 12 fours and 3 sixes. And just on this is where a generation ago, a tour game was a great opportunity for a young player because, it's one thing to do it at state cricket and get picked to go on the tour. But, if you're not playing the Test matches, the tour game is your Test match. And, Watto... making runs here definitely left an impression. And look, there were other Australians who made runs in this game. Justin Langer, 161, has done Test match special as recently as a couple of years ago. He has been a commentator. I think it's unlikely, but it could be.
I think that could work because he was prominent because he did the Ashes, didn't he? He did the 23 Ashes. He was on TMS throughout doing special comments, wasn't he?
He didn't do it the whole way through, but he definitely did some of it. I can't quite remember the sequence.
I'm pretty
here.
sure I remember him.
No, you know what he did? He did the World Test Championship final. That's what he did for TMS. Yes, he was out doing Channel 7. He was one of the Channel 7, and Channel 7 had the rights to the World Test Championship final, and Langer was on ICC TV. So he was out in England, but yeah, I mean, you want to read it strictly. You want to read the clue as it is here from Jacob Norton. Is Justin Langer a TMS commentator? Yes, he is.
Now.
Before he's done that job.
Yeah.
I don't think Watto has, but Langer has. So there you go.
Not to my knowledge.
And also in that tour game, I mean, Jason Gillespie's playing. He makes 15, and then, if you want to keep scrolling through it, or there's not.
Well, he's done TMS a bit, Gillespie.
Yeah, but in terms of the performance from him, I doubt we'd be plucking.
Stand out. But.
I doubt we'd be plucking a Gillespie 1 for 33, another none for in the second dig, and 15 with the blade. I doubt that'd be what would draw it through. But Dizzy, yes, he's done loads of work on radio commentary, going back to, gosh, when did Dizzy first start doing?
Probably 2015 or so.
I reckon earlier than that for commentary in England. I reckon Dizzy was doing TMS. He might have even done it in the 2009 Ashes, I reckon. Possibility. He was probably over here, just about over here coaching by that stage, and he was seen as such a credible voice and still is on the English circuit. So, it could be Gillespie, although I doubt it was for this thing. And I mean, we coming back to Watson, we all know that he was a guy who wasn't really known for making three figures when playing in the whites and wearing the baggy green, albeit this wasn't the baggy green. It would have been the Cricket Australia 11 cap or something something related to that. A baggy green, that's right. And, he picked up he did okay with the ball in this game as well, picked up a couple of early wickets in the first innings, including Graham Smith and Daryl Cullinan. He got him leg before wicket. Cullinan was the captain of South Africa A in this tour game, this warm-up game.
Yeah, that's weird. That's weird in itself. Like, Cullinan's such an experienced player by that point to be in the A team.
Yeah, that's true. And I suppose this looks on paper like it was pretty much the South African team. Well, not entirely, but there's a handful of them here. Graham Smith was well and truly there by this point.
When did Smith debut?
Hamish Amla. Hamish Amla? Hashim Amla.
Hamish
Amla. Bloody hell. Yeah. How quick you forget. Robin Peterson was in that team. Yeah. So, yes, anyway. So,
but at that point, 0-2-3 would have been Gibbs, and was he opening with Smith by then? Or
this was the series when Smith got the absolute shit sledged out of him by the Australians.
Oh, yeah. It might have been his
first
series.
This is the series. Yeah, this is the series when the Australians see a young bloke and go, "We're going to make your life a living hell."
The one that
this is probably the worst.
I remember quoting it in the Sandpaper book about about Matthew Hayden and Graham Smith and all that.
Well, yeah, this is probably the worst of the ugly Australian era, I reckon. Around here through until the Test match in the Caribbean when they got 418 chased down, and we talk about the spirit of cricket. Remember, Cricket Australia initiated the spirit of cricket process internally because, as the late great Peter Young told the story so eloquently, the receptionist at Cricket Australia was getting so many abusive phone calls. They were like, "Fuck, we've got to do something here. They might be the best team in the world, but their reputation is dog shit in the wider community. People don't want them to win in the same way they wanted them to win when they liked them more."
Yeah.
So they went about a process of introducing a spirit of cricket. I guess it was their own code of conduct or something.
Yeah.
And
Steve Waugh who floated it, which went down very badly.
Well, yeah, I guess it was seen as a bit of a contradictory thing given Waugh was overseeing the teams that behaved so poorly.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's a roundabout way of saying, and I'm really sorry to say this, Jacob, that we don't actually have this one licked. But there are some options, and I look forward to on the rebound telling your story in a bit more depth. So let us know what 574 was, and we'll make sure we get to it again soon.
I like it. Tour games, there aren't as many of them. Plenty of TMS commentating options in there, and we've got a 574. Ticks boxes for me. One last break, then my last number.
All right, it's story time 192. Adam Collins with you, Jeff Lemon with me. Jeff's the man with the last number to deal with today before we turn our recorders off and go and do some other things for our weekend. I don't know what you're up to. I'm seeing a couple of gigs. How cultured of me. I don't get to do those types of things these days. I've got friends in England. Yep. Indeed, a friend of yours as well. Matt Clemo's here with his family at the moment. So we will be one of the best friends of the show doing fun, family, wholesome stuff around London tomorrow. and then I won't be playing cricket this weekend, which
Okay.
is an unusual thing. It's like that's the man bites dog for me at the moment.
It is for you. For me, this number is from James Sprague. James Sprague, not James Prague. Not like I met James in Prague and I put him on my phone as James Prague because I didn't know what his last name was. David Yayas kind of deal. James Sprague. Maybe it's Sprague, but it could be Sprague. Let's go with that. It is £2.13, and as you know, if you've been listening to the show for a while, 213 is the magic number of the final word. We did an entire episode once a long time ago, probably maybe 5 years ago now, all about 213 and the different 213. So this was a challenge to find something that was a new 213 that went somewhere else with it. And it started actually with a number from Matthew Sher a couple of weeks ago with a 268. And there was something else that I was looking at with the 268 where I went in a different direction. But that got me started towards something that led to a 213. And I thought, this was an interesting story, Adam, because this was one that I didn't know much about. You might. I'd be interested to see whether you do remember anything about this. It's a bonkers story. It's not quite having a tie chasing 593 sort of bonkers, but it is still pretty fourth innings bonkers. And I'd be interested to see what your memories of it might be by the time we get to it. And this, so the 268 happens in a game that this answer isn't about specifically, but it gets us to where we're going because it is about Michael Atherton's highest first-class score. And so for a pledge starting in pounds, this seemed like a reasonable place to start. Michael Atherton, very well regarded, his commentary, his writing, and so on. I like that when you Google Michael Atherton now and the little tile comes up, it doesn't say cricketer, it says public figure. So he's transcended cricket in the Richie Bennett way.
He did do that public intellectual thing the other day. He was comparing a segment for the MCC at the... don't know what they were called. Was it Cricket Connects when they got all the big administrators in the room? We'll do something on that, by the way, later in the month, later in July. I think we'll come back and see how they went. But yeah, Atherton wasn't there as a journo, nor was he really there as a former player. He was there as like Mike Atherton thinker, compare, that kind of thing. So that all lines up.
Well, what's the go with the compares? Let's put that question through.
That's pretty niche, but I like it.
That is very niche, but three people will get it and enjoy it. So Michael Atherton, a bit of a callback. He came up earlier. Someone else will as well. Imagine, if you will, a Lancashire side, which involves Atherton, John Crawley, the man who made 2 runs during a session of the Sydney Test in 2002, 3, whenever it was.
A bit earlier than that, I think. But yeah, I think it might have been. I think it was 94, 95.
No, they pull him back. He came back for that later tour as like an emergency. I'm sure he's there. He comes in and plays. Did he
play in 0203?
Yeah, he played.
I know he definitely toured in 94, 95 and 98, 99. I didn't realise he came back for a third swing.
I'm sure. Well, someone will tell me if I'm wrong, but in my memory may be suspect. But I'm sure he comes back and plays 1 or 2 at the end of the series when they bring in like James Foster's keeping and the whole team's being shaken up and that sort of thing.
Okay.
And he bats a very defensive morning session and scores 2 runs in the session. That's my memory. Might be wrong. Might be Mandela effect. You tell me. Anyway, he's there. He's in this side. Neil Fairbrother's there. Warren Hegg, who you did something on recently, I think.
Only a couple of weeks ago, we did a Warren Hegg answer. So nice that he gets name checked twice inside a month.
Yep. Andrew Flintoff, whose son is doing good things at the moment. And
sure is.
In this Lancashire side, Mattia Muralitharan. That's something I forgot about. I'll tell you what. Let's start with Atherton. A player who'd been playing since 1987. Until December 1998, had never made a first-class double century. But his first one was not this 268. His first one was 6 months earlier, fittingly, callback again in a tour game, when an Australian 11 played an England 11 in Hobart in 1998. This is the game I'm wondering if you remember. It must be said, this is up there with the most powder puff ways you can possibly make a double 100. So Gavin Robertson, Australian Test legend Gavin Robertson, as per Fox Sports, withdrew from the side with back spasms before the game, but they only had 11 players, so they had to put him on the team sheet anyway, even though he couldn't bat or bowl. So they're down a bowler before the game's even started. Paul Rifle breaks down after 9 deliveries and has to leave the field. So the bowling attack as it were, in inverted commas, to start things off, is Michael Kasprovic and Brendan Julian. Greg Blewett is bowling second change, or effectively first change, because Rifle's gone off after an over and a half. Stuart Law and Michael Bevan bowl 44 overs between them. Matty Elliott gets a bowl. Darren Lehman gets a bowl. Call back again. And then just as they take the second new ball, Kasprovic goes off with a muscle strain. So they have one actual bowler after this, which is Brendan Julian. At one point, Ellen Border, who is coaching this side, who is like, I don't know, 45 or something at this point, is substitute fielding for the Australian 11, along with some Tasmanian teenagers who they've got in from club cricket. It's not going real well for the Australian touring side or non-touring side.
My main recollection of this game is Graham Hick, actually. Graham Hick absolutely teeing off and getting himself a spot in the Melbourne Test. I think that was just before Chrissy, it rings a bell. But I remember Graham Hick took advantage of, I do remember it was a depleted Australian attack. Yeah. And they were funny old games, these, because invariably the Australian 11 would make shitloads of runs, and it would be a combination of Elliott and Hayden often, and then you'd have players like Greg Blewett who made runs in this game as well. And there was one instance where Stuart Law was the captain. Might have been 96, 97. I reckon Hayden and Elliott both made big hundreds, and Law came in at number 3 and made a golden duck. Like the classic kind of pad rash, as it were, and only to go in and be victim to a 2-2. But they were important games, the ones down in Hobart. They were significant because it did provide a platform for players who did well. But this was an exception because of the way the game played out. And it belied how dominant or how at times uncompetitive England were in this series. Although, to be fair, they win a week later at Melbourne, don't they? So whatever confidence they took from this, they took straight to the MCG, even if Atherton didn't, because, he gets his double here, but bags a pair at Melbourne.
Well, get this. In terms of confidence, let's not go quite so early. So the England 11 make 469. Australia bat, they don't make that many. They make 200 and something. Greg Blewett makes 169 not out. And the Australian 11 declare 176 runs behind to try to set up a game, which they go on to win.
So that's right. They chase 1 million, don't they?
So Atherton as captain, third innings, starting 176 in front. Atherton, who's the captain, drops himself down the order because he's already got runs. Mark Butcher makes 100 opening the batting. Crawley makes a fast 60. A few other runs are scored, and they declare 375 in front, only for the Australian team to run it down, 1 wicket down, in 55 overs. 376 in 55 overs. Greg Blewett makes 213 off 180 balls. And Corey Richards, who I don't remember at all, makes 138 off 143. Either side of Matty Elliott getting out for 8. So real Stuart Law energy, like you just suggested. Which means that Blewett, 213 not out, to go with 169 not out. 382 runs unbeaten in the match. And they win it a wicket down, like they just mow it. I have no idea how this happens, but they do it in sort of, we invented baseball. They do it in absolutely record time. But I guess it doesn't matter that much. It's a tour game. It gets Atherton the landmark, the double 100, and 6 months later he gets a more real double 100. In this county game against Glamorgan at Blackpool, he's 176 not out overnight, 268 not out by the time he's done. And it's a big deal because he's had all of these back problems. He's been out of sides. He's been, there's been speculation that his career is going to be done because he can't keep playing with these injuries. There's a column from Nasser Hussain at the time who writes, "The best news by far came as I was driving home from Southend on Wednesday. Instead of hearing about Atherton's back problems, the radio instead told me that Atherton was back." And Nasser's very happy to have him. It gets Lancashire to 556, at which point they throw the ball to Murali, who then takes the first 5 wickets to fall, takes a catch to dismiss the 6th wicket to fall, and then gets Adrian Dawood, the opener, who's gone on to 100, gets him out for Murali's 6th wicket. 6 for 104 in the innings for Murali. They enforce the follow on. He takes another 4 for 72. He bowls 88 and a half overs in true Muralitharan style, which means that the other team set Lancashire 19 runs to win. Atherton 13 not out for 281 in the match. Unbeaten. Which brings me to Murali at Lancashire, because this is absolutely bonkers. He plays 4 seasons there, 99, 2001, 2005, 2007, when he's available. 28 matches in all. Not that many, 28 first-class games. In that time, 203 wickets at 15. in 28 games.
Do you know what that reminds me of when you say that, when you put it in those terms? That's Titch Freeman-esque. Because they played more than 28 first-class games in a season when you consider university games and other games that wouldn't ordinarily appear on the schedule, of course.
True.
The season
it's about one
with
three-day
cricket.
28 games.
Yeah, 3-day cricket. I mean, there would have been instances where Freeman played a lot more than 28 games when he was banking his run of 5. Those 6 seasons in a row where he took
200 plus.
200 plus. So, this is spread out across 4 or 5 years with Murali, but if you just, fashion the numbers the way you have there, that is reminiscent of what was being done 100 years prior, or near enough to 100 years prior.
Yeah, well, particularly this stat, which gets me most of all, 22 5-wicket hauls in those 28 games.
Yeah, exactly.
That's pure Titch Freeman. Just gets a 5 for every time he rocks up. 6 times he takes 10 in a match in 28 games. So 1 match in 4, he takes 10 in a match. And then somewhere in between, for some reason, he plays a couple of scattered games for Kent over a couple of different seasons. 5 games for Kent. 4 times he takes a 5-wicket bag in those 5 games, and he takes 33 wickets at 13 for Kent. So Murali, bless him. I mean, you think of him. You think of him in a certain context. You think of him on spinning pitches. You think of him at home in Sri Lanka, and he is traduced. He is undermined and degraded by people who go, "Oh, I only played Bangladesh and Zimbabwe," and all that kind of bullshit. Given that Australia just refused to ever play them, I don't think that's a card you can credibly play. But that wasn't him. He was off there in England in that many seasons, dominating in those conditions as well, to such a ridiculous extent. And it's not the first thing that pops into my head. Matteo Muralitharan, Lancashire hero, but bloody hell, there's not that many players that take 200 wickets for a county club.
Yeah, 236 wickets in 32 championship games.
Yeah.
So if he didn't play any other clubs, I don't think he did. That is almost the analysis you would see with Freeman at his best. I'd come back to that point I made before. So nice, beautiful place to leave it. Hopefully that was relatively close to the pin. It's turned out to be quite an enjoyable show. That was Storytime 192, a slightly abridged version given we've had a number of constraints this week, but we hope you've enjoyed it. Next week we'll be busy on the show. We're going to have a weekly show coming out at the start of the week in the usual way. Another rep I'm trying to drop in there. There might be an interview. I'm still trying to line up the pieces on that, but there'll definitely be a preview to James Anderson's final test match from Lords coming your way on Tuesday. Then there'll be dailies, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, however long the test match goes, the England-West Indies dailies, which will all be brought to you. I neglected to mention off the top of the show, and I feel bad for it, but they'll forgive me because God knows we'll be talking about them a lot over the next couple of months by Westfield London and Westfield Stratford City. Keep downloading the app. Please keep downloading the Westfield app. Keep doing the right thing. And we will have a lot more to say about them as we move towards let's call it the England home test summer. I know the season's been going for months, but the test summer starting on the 10th of July this year due to the 20-over World Cup that finished last week. And that's us done. If you really like what we do and you want to be part of this Storytime adventure that's been going for, nearly 5 years now, it's patreon.com/the final word. Gets you access to Discord. It means you can meet the types of people who I watched the election with last night. Maybe that's no interest to you and you just want to talk about cricket. Well, that's where Discord will be the place you make, I'm sure, lifelong friendships. That's what we've learned, that the people who find each other on there tend to remain close friends. And why wouldn't they? Because they've got a lot in common and much of it is centered around the game and being just fundamentally good people. So patreon.com/the final word. And I think, Jeff, that's just about it from me. Anything further from you?
I think that's it. I'm pleased to be out the back of that wild month that we've had. Glad to calm things down for a little while, and we'll look forward to relaxing with you as the northern summer and the Australian winter goes on. It was 1 degree in Melbourne the other day as various friends of mine were defrosting their windscreens. And I think of you as I melt in a Portuguese summer where it is bloody hot over here, but I'm not complaining.
And I'll be thinking of you when Hawthorn make the trip down Geelong Road tomorrow to play Cardinia Park on Saturday. The Saturday twilight game, I'll be up tomorrow morning watching that with Winnie. Hopefully we win again. That would be brilliant. All right, that's us done. This has been Storytime 192. Please have a nice weekend. Bye.